I have recently learned a term that finally puts a name to something that I have seen run rampant in the equine industry, and it describes situations that just have not sat well with me, but I wasn't really sure how to explain what was going on, what I was observing, and just why I felt like there was a disconnect between what we were being told to do and what was actually happening. So this term is called pathological altruism. And I'll bet if you're like me, you have never heard of pathological altruism before. And it is something that once you know what it is and what to look for, because we're going to talk about some examples here in this chat, you're not going to be able to unsee it now that those blinders are going to be taken off. And learning about pathological altruism and understanding the concepts behind it and how it impacts us is a huge game changer for instructors and how we run our programs, manage our students, get good outcomes that actually result in good outcomes. So we're going to talk about what pathological altruism is, who coined the term, how does it apply to us in general as instructors, and then we're also going to look at some examples of how it also impacts and manifests in our students, our horses, and our volunteers. My name is Sabra Popoli, and I'm the owner and founder of Hoof Falls and Footfalls. And through Hoof Falls and Footfalls, I am on a mission to help educate, equip, and encourage fellow adaptive, or also called therapeutic, horseback riding instructors around the globe. And during my time teaching, I have stumbled across many situations where I have encountered, either on the receiving end or on the giving end of it, of pathological altruism. And as an instructor, and why I kind of started up Hoof Falls and Footfalls and the educational piece is because I love learning about new things that help me grow and become a better instructor, and I love sharing that information with other instructors so that you guys can grow and accelerate in your teaching and what you guys are doing. So I recently shared a Facebook post and email on pathological altruism on the Hoof Falls and Footfalls website. And the response from fellow instructors was way bigger than I had anticipated. And so that's what prompted me to make this video, because a lot of them were saying, oh my goodness, like I finally now also have a term for what I've been seeing and the things that aren't just setting well. This is a topic that we need to be talking about more. This would be a great conference topic. So I wanted to take that feedback and information and turn it into a video or a podcast, wherever you're watching or listening, for you guys, so that we can talk about this, to me, really interesting topic that applies to us, not just in the horse world, but to us as human beings. So again, like I said, once you know what it is and what to look for, you now can't unsee it. So you're welcome. I'm sorry, not quite sure which one. You can let me know at the end. Down in the comments, let me know, have you ever heard of pathological altruism? And if you have, do you actually know what it is? And have you done any research on it? So pathological altruism was coined by Dr. Barbara Oakley. She does a lot of research on human psychology and human learning and how people interact together. She's a really, really interesting person. And I was doing some research on teaching theory, because she co-wrote a really awesome book called Uncommon Sense Teaching. And I think in one of the podcast or articles she had wrote on that, she had mentioned pathological altruism, or her name came up with it. And that really piqued my interest because I love psychology. Fun fact, that's what my degree is in for college, is psychology, not equine. I just have a bunch of specialty certifications and training from there, but I love psychology. So I started digging into pathological altruism, just thinking it'd be interesting. And then all of a sudden, the blinders were taken off. And it was this huge aha moment of, oh my goodness, this is what's happening in the equine world in general, but also a lot in equine assisted services. So equine assisted services is the term that encompasses equine assisted learning, equine facilitated mental health, and then the recreational side of what I specialize in and where my heart is at is adaptive, or also called therapeutic horsemanship and riding. So, and there's other different types underneath of there, but those are some of the common ones that you might hear when equine assisted services get brought up. So pathological altruism, Dr. Oakley defines it as altruism in which attempts to promote the welfare of others instead results in unanticipated harm. So kind of breaking down the fancy definition of that is that we have good intentions and we're acting on good intentions, but the outcome or what happens from those actions is not beneficial and is actually harmful and does not create the good outcome that we were wanting. So we're going to take a look at some examples of how I see pathological altruism and the good intentions gone wrong or gone harmful show up as it relates to instructors, students, horses, and volunteers. So we see these all the time, and what's really, really surprising to, well, not really surprising, but it's something to that things that you could now label as pathological altruism. These are things that are promoted actually as best practices or as the norms in our industry, especially in the equine world and in service-based industries like what we do, providing lessons, and also in the nonprofit world. If you're a nonprofit, I'm an LLC, but I see this happen in traditional businesses as well, not just nonprofit. But when I worked in the nonprofit world for 10 years, I saw it there too. And these pathological altruism tendencies and intentions were very much promoted as if you do these are doing right by those that we are trying to serve. So let's take a look at some of the examples that popped into my head when I started breaking down pathological altruism. Let me know if you have seen these and you've either been on the giving side of you had the positive intention, but it didn't result in good outcome, or maybe you've been on the receiving end and someone had good intentions, but how it actually resulted for you did not match up well and it was maybe harmful or opposite result. So I'd love to hear down below in the comments, and if I missed a big one as well, let me know, because this is a great place to discuss this topic so that we can learn and grow and be better instructors and really better human beings, because this is something that applies to us in everyday life. So as instructors, where I see pathological altruism happen a lot is in our policies and our procedures. So that could look like having the good intention of not charging a lot or not charging anything at all because we want the outcome of making it very accessible, having a bunch of people be able to participate, and having finances not be a hindrance to them getting to do stuff with horses. But when we actually take a look at the outcome of when we provide services at below what they are worth and or free, some of the negative outcomes could be that your program is maybe not taken as seriously. So you could be an amazing instructor, but because you're underpricing yourself, the perception of who you are, what you do, and what the outcomes are less than actually what you are. That's just how human beings and our brains work. Another thing that could result from that is that if there's no investment financially, and I'm not saying to charge every family the same, because $5 to one family could have the same impact on them financially as $50 to another. There's variability within there that we have to keep in mind. But when we don't charge anything, or when we don't have any type of investment or counterbalance of like very strict attendance policies and agreement for participating in the program, if it's free, whatever those look like, then our students don't show up because they don't value it. They actually may not they may not perceive the outcomes. So like what they get from lessons, all the positive beneficial stuff, what they get from lessons, they might not see it as valuable to them, or they may not have thought that they got as much out of it. There's some really cool studies on that of people receiving the same exact service but getting charged different prices for them, and then their overall satisfaction and what they got out of it was different. So look into those if you want to learn more about that. It's mostly kind of like in the business sciences world, but really interesting. So along those lines with like the policies and procedures as far as the intentions of like charging and is it free, what goes along with that too is the letting the boundaries slide. So because we are trying to make it work for families, we might have the good intention of having loose cancellation policies or loose makeup policies, and oh, it's okay if you need to cancel, thanks for the heads up, and then we're financially at a loss. And when we have the good intention of trying to be flexible, unfortunately, the negative outcome of that is the families know that that's a flexible activity. So they're not going to value the lessons as much or make it a priority. And then also financially, we might be struggling because we aren't having the income from those lessons to help feed our lesson horses and keep the program running and pay instructors and do everything else that we have to do in a barn, right? So there's a trickle down effect too of we think we're being super accommodating and flexible, but really the outcome is not setting anybody up for success long term. Another area I see this is taking on too many students or keeping students on too long and being afraid to pass them on to bigger and better things. So I see a lot of programs and instructors trying to chase an empty wait list because, again, they've got that servant heart. They want to make it happen for everybody. There's not other programs in the area. I'm the only one. So they feel that burden of trying to be that program for everybody. But realistically, per human instructor, per horse, volunteer resources, funding resources, we can only serve so many people in what we do. And I challenge instructors to see wait lists as a good thing because that means that you're doing something well and people are wanting your services. And so trying to have the good intention of serving more, clearing out that wait list could actually result in a decline of your services because you're spread too thin. It could result in just growing at unsustainable levels because that wait list is probably not going to go away. And if it does, it's usually not for a good reason. But you could be growing in unsustainable ways and then you eventually just burn out and you're not there for anybody. So again, good intention of wanting to serve people, but then not knowing how much we can do and drawing boundaries and trying to be the yes for everybody, that can damage everybody involved. And when we're afraid to say, hey, you've outgrown my program, let's try to find you another program to link up with, we could unintentionally be harming our students' progress and harming their advancement in horse sports or horse activities because we think that we're the best instructor for them, or nobody else is going to care about them as much as I do, or they're not going to have as good of horses as I do. Like, I've totally been guilty of all those thoughts before myself. So again, good intention of wanting to do the best by your student, but we also need to understand when it's time to let go and provide them with other opportunities, and it may not be with us. And then last one on the instructor side, this goes into, kind of ties into the volunteer piece sometimes later or support person piece later, is having the good intention of getting someone started in instructor training or onboarding or instructor certification, whatever route you're going, adding a new instructor, and adding that instructor because either somebody wants it so bad because they just love what we do with the horses and with the kids and with the adults and everyone that we serve, or we are hurting so bad for an instructor that we need to make it happen and we need to grow an instructor now and we need to make it happen now, and then they'll figure it out as they go. So kind of two different ways I see this of we have the good intentions of adding an instructor, whatever the root cause is for it. But when we are doing it out of desperation on either side, the person wanting to be an instructor side or the program side, because we need people, what that usually results in is skipping steps when we're getting ready to have that person start their training. And when we skip steps and try to pop somebody into that instructor position before they're ready and they don't have foundational skills, usually I see it with people not having enough foundation in horses, in riding and groundwork skills, because it's really hard to teach something that you don't know how to do yourself, that we're setting that person up for success. If they're the ones coming in with the big heart, they want to make it work. Maybe they have some experience with, teaching or disabilities, but they just have no horse experience or very minimal. And we're trying to have them do something that is just outside of what they can do even with help at that time. And we're just overloading them. We would call that pushing them outside of their zone of proximal development. If you want to learn more about zone of proximal development, check out the Intuitive Instructor Club. I've got tons of presentations on progression as it applies to our students and our instructors as well. So the ZPT, zone of proximal development, happens there. So we completely smash zone of proximal development and keeping people in that sweet spot of learning or that Goldilocks zone when we have good intentions of trying to get them started on doing something, but we're progressing them too fast or too quickly or just putting them into a situation where they are not ready. On the flip side, when it's more program rooted, we might be trying to put somebody in because we need that person so bad. They might have some of the skills, but they might be a yes person and know that we need that position filled, but they might be afraid of saying no. And we are so blinded by needing to serve those students that we are not listening to what the instructor is saying, and we might try to funnel in somebody who just isn't the right fit. And you might be able to make it work for a few months, but usually then it implodes and you're back to where you were of struggling to find an instructor, or you're worse off because you grew and expanded on top of this instructor that was already a weak link. And I'm not meaning that in a bad way, but just something that we shouldn't have been building off of. So again, that's going to hurt your students. So the quality of lessons they get, the progression, the volunteers, you might see volunteers start to leave because that instructor they're with doesn't know how to manage volunteers well. They're getting grumpy because they are burnt out and they're just over challenged and doing stuff that is beyond what they can do. Horses are impacted because the instructor doesn't have management skills, just all those things, okay? So we need to be very aware of these things on the instructor side of how pathological altruism manifests, because we've got to stop normalizing and promoting running ourselves into the ground. And also then when we bring in new instructors of, just telling them, oh, well, it's part of the job of running yourself into the ground, and you not being able to set boundaries or have off days or constantly rescheduling to make it work, or, giving away your services across the board. And I'm not saying you can't do that with a portion of it, but just setting yourself up across the board as an instructor and as a program of having tons of good intentions, but the outcome is not creating what you want, and it's usually not benefiting anybody involved in the long term. For a little bit of time, it might look okay, but if you actually step back and look at the big picture and what is actually happening, not what you were hoping to happen, there's a different story there. And again, I'm, saying it to myself because I've been there, done that. All right, so let's talk about pathological altruism and how we see it in our students. So the times I see this happen is when we say yes to somebody because we're afraid to say no, it's not a good fit, because we, again, have that good intention of wanting to serve them, wanting to give them the opportunity of being with a horse, but we might not be screening appropriately for contraindications. So something that means that they shouldn't be participating in mounted activities, or maybe mom and dad want it so bad for this kid to do it, but horses are just not the kid's thing. And so we're trying to force it and make it work beyond what's reasonable. Not saying we should never give it a go. Or kids coming in and they have allergies, but parents want them to tough through it, but they're like a boogery mess and miserable during lessons. So us having the good intention of making it work, keeping the student happy, or sometimes even keeping parents happy over top of the student. That's happened too. I know that's sometimes a harder conversation to have, is with the parent's caregiver versus the student. But then the outcome is not good for anybody involved. Eventually, the parents are not going to be happy with it because you're, again, trying to do something that's just not set up for success in the long run. Saying yes to students and their parents too, when they are pushing and wanting to know when their student gets to trot or gets to go run around the arena, aka go canter or maybe trot. I don't know. I've heard run labeled, labeling different things. But we sometimes feel that pressure of wanting to keep the parents happy, not wanting them to leave our program. Oh no, because we might have to find another student. Not wanting to lose the student, not wanting our student to be bored. Like, again, all good intentions. But then we give in and we skip steps. We have that student do something way too soon, and then that's usually when accidents happen, or the student gets scared or burned out because we were asking them to do way too much way too soon. And the parents eventually are going to also still not be happy with it, because if we are constantly giving to what they're saying we should do, then that's eventually going to reach a blow-up point. So again, good intention of wanting to keep students engaged, wanting to keep parents happy, have good student success, all good things. But if the outcome is saying yes to just keep them happy and go faster, even though we're maybe not ready yet, that's when that pathological altruism can slip in to that situation. This also, the next one ties into the one I mentioned above with the program policies and procedures, but again, just reinforcing that being that flexible program, having super loose policies around attendance and cancellation and payment and undervaluing things, that is not doing your student any good, because they're learning to not prioritize your program. Sometimes we have to be the leading push to say, hey, this is important, you committed to it, you need to make it happen. And oh wow, look at all this progress that happens when you actually show up to lessons consistently. So we feel like we're being kind, we feel like we're being flexible, that we're gonna, meet the families where they are. And I get it, yes, especially in adaptive riding, we might be working with some medically fragile families, but that doesn't mean that those situations apply across the board. Maybe you have one or two students where they're in that medically fragile situation and there's a special arrangement there that's written out, very clear, again, setting everybody up for success. But across the board, know that you need to have good intentions of wanting to see your students progress and making sure the families are happy with your program, but how you do it is not through loose policies and procedures and crazy flexibility and all this stuff. It's going to backfire on you, okay? All right, so let's talk about now where we're going to see pathological altruism manifesting and impacting our volunteers or support staff or support teams, whatever you label it as, depending on if you're a nonprofit or if you are an LLC. Might look a little different for you guys. But again, structure, boundaries, rules, policies, procedures, it sounds like I'm, repeating it, but really, it applies across the board. I think it's Jocko Willink who says that there's freedom within boundary or freedom within structure. He writes a couple really, really good books on leadership. So Jocko Willink, look him up, but he's got this, kind of counterintuitive thought, and I see it work, is that, again, trying to avoid that pathological altruism of being flexible, not having rules, not having boundaries because we think it'll make everybody happy. The result is actually then there's more confusion, more frustration. People don't know what's expected of them. Where if we had more boundaries and rules and consistency, we would actually have the outcome that we were wanting. So that's why we have to step back and look at things. And again, be aware of pathological altruism. So when our good intentions aren't actually resulting in that good. So with our volunteers, we get a lot of different volunteer personality types and backgrounds and horse experience coming in, right? From who's going to come in and help in our program. And we want to keep everybody happy and find everybody a job. But if we say yes to everybody and let them lead this experience versus us setting these boundaries and, setting up avenues for them to be successful because we are experienced in this service and in this industry and in the adaptive riding world or whatever equine assisted service you do, if we don't step up and take that role and set them up for success, and we just try to say yes to everyone and keep everybody happy, again, it'll work maybe for a short period of time, and then it's all going to fall apart and implode, and nobody's going to be happy. So we need to, for sure, make sure that we step up and have clear boundaries and rules and expectations for everybody, because that's going to get that outcome that you are wanting and that they are wanting. A lot of times I'll see pathological altruism in how we onboard and train our volunteers. So we will let people jump into certain positions, usually horse related, way too fast because we think, oh, that horse, that's going to be the carrot to get them to stay because I really need volunteers for these lessons. So again, what's causing that? Is that actually a good solution? And is it going to last long term? Usually no. So because we want to keep all the peoples and keep all the volunteers and not have them, get bored or leave because they didn't get their horse time that they wanted, we often push them into those horse roles too early, or we skip training, or we invest training into somebody a little bit too soon before we know that they're actually going to be a good investment of our time. And then we're out time. We are out, maybe we built a class around those volunteers and they flaked out, and then now we're back where we were, even worse off, and now we don't know what to do with these students. And also our horses suffer from that too, because they're the ones having to pick up the slack and be the fill-in between the people who are just not trained and don't have the skills to appropriately handle these living creatures that we are working alongside. Horses are not robots. And as good trained as they are, we need to also then make sure that the humans working alongside of them and with them are also as well trained as that horse. So, that's an unfair expectation too of expecting our horses to pick up the slack, because we're afraid to make our volunteers slow down and go through the appropriate training processes and not use our horses as that carrot to keep them there in the wrong way. Are our horses a bonus of getting to volunteer at a program or getting to be a working student or an intern at an adaptive riding program? Absolutely. But there is a good way that we can have the good intention of having that horse be a beneficial experience for everybody and have good outcomes that are setting the horse and your volunteers and your students and you as the instructor up for success. Another area I see this as it relates to volunteers is not phasing them out of our students' team when that student is ready to progress. Because again, we're afraid of hurting that volunteer's feelings and afraid of losing volunteers. So good intention of volunteer retention and keeping them happy and showing them they're valued. Good. Outcome though is the volunteer is probably going to feel like they're not doing much because the student really doesn't need them. And two, we are holding back our student. And the whole reason why we are here is for our students, not really for our volunteers. Our volunteers should be there for the student. So we need to be willing to have those hard conversations. Also, keep growing as instructors so we know different ways to incorporate our volunteers in lessons and in support roles. That doesn't mean that they're right by the student, but is setting everybody up for success and retention. So be careful of the good intention of valuing your volunteers isn't then overshadowing your students and their needs there. All right, so last area that we're going to look at here is how it impacts our horses. And I kind of mentioned it a little bit in the other areas of instructors and students and volunteers. But the horses are really the ones that, I don't want to say stand out the most to me, but I think they're the ones that really get the rough end of the stick here when it comes to, or short end of the stick. So the horses, they get the short end of the stick when it comes to this pathological altruism, because they're often the silent ones that just have to put up with us humans deciding to do what we're going to do. And so, like I already mentioned it, our horses get the not great impact of inexperienced people handling them when we are trying to have the good intention of finding and keeping volunteers and using that horse handling experience as the carrot to keep them in, but the horse is suffering there. And then the horse might start to have what we see as bad behaviors, which really are not necessarily bad behaviors. They just could be allowed behaviors that the horse hasn't been corrected on or has been taught to do or allowed to do. And then the horse gets labeled as a bad horse or a naughty horse or someone who they don't want to lead or work with, or, a horse that students don't like anymore. When really, it's not that. It ties back to us not training our volunteers appropriately, or training our students or our instructors or whoever is working and handling with those horses appropriately. I see this happen a lot too. Again, this ties back to being a yes person and not wanting to say no, and having the good intention of serving people, but the overly good intention of serving everybody. And we expect our horses to it's just 5 minutes. It's just 5 more pounds. It's just at a walk. So we try to justify or minimize what we're asking our horses to do as a lesson horse, because that is completely different than a privately owned horse. Our lesson horses have completely different lives than a privately owned horse with 1 or 2 people riding them a few days a week, and our lesson horses having to work multiple times during the week with multiple beginner riders. And again, we sometimes let the emotions of serving those people and almost treating horses as a right versus a privilege, and I know that can be a slippery slope into then should we be doing anything with horses, and I'm not saying we need to go that far, but we do need to understand that when we are physically impacting the horse by handling them, riding them especially, that we do need to consider what we're asking of them, because just 5 minutes or just 5 more pounds or just at a walk because they're not sound enough for a trot, is that really beneficial to the horse? No. And also, horses communicate through behavior. So a lot of safety situations that happen are preventable, and some of them, like horses nipping at people, biting their leaders, biting students, bucking off students, crow hopping, even if it's not a full buck, bolting, spooking, all of those usually tie back to we're putting that horse in a situation that they should not be in because we had good intentions for the student or whatever situation, and the horse is just expected to put up with it and make it happen. So we have to be very, very careful of that. We need to teach people coming into our program that ethically, we also have to consider the well-being of these animals that we are working alongside. And again, it's a balance because, do every day, do I feel like going to work? No. Is my horse always going to feel like going to work? No. But there's a reasonable effort and a reasonable expectation we can ask of our horses versus unreasonable expectations that's just setting them up for failure, setting them up for discomfort. Those can be avoided. So with our horses as well, the skipping the rest days or skipping, a solid, consistent work schedule and consistency with students and handlers, I see that get botched all the time because, again, we're trying to say yes to rescheduling and yes to makeup lessons if somebody's out of town because, hey, they give me a 24-hour heads up notice, right? And they're not going to pay me if they don't come out and ride, so I have to make up this lesson. But then that has the trickle-down effect of impacting our horses. So again, have the good intention of trying to work well with our students. We already talked about why that's not really going to create a good outcome for them. But then now if we do go that track of having that intention of being flexible for our students, our horses are now going to have the short end of the stick again because their work schedule isn't consistent and things might fall through the cracks when we're looking and planning at things as instructors and trying to make it work and make the budget work and make the finances come in so I can still feed my horses, right? So there are things that we can do to set ourselves up where it's altruistic and good intentions and we have good outcomes, even though the how it happens might be different than what we think or what we've been told needs to happen with our horses. And this is a hard conversation, probably a whole nother, thing in a nutshell, but also like when it comes to retiring our horses from the program, we have the altruistic desire to retire them out on a green field somewhere with someone who's going to love and care for them forever, or keep them in the program forever and we'll just, keep them working as much as they can because they have to earn their keep, but like it's very clear that they're done. So then what do you do there? So again, because we're maybe afraid to make that tough decision of giving the horse their good last day and they end their time with us here on a good note versus, oh, I don't want to be that person. I don't want my volunteers to think I'm heartless with making a tough decision. And then we retire them off somewhere else. And then that horse meets a horrible end due to abandonment or lack of nutrition or someone not caring for them and riding them when they shouldn't be ridden anymore, whatever it is. We kind of, kick the can down the road to somebody else because we don't want to have to make that tough decision or be seen as the bad person by other people in our program. But again, the horse is the one who suffers. And so even though we have this desire to not have that hard conversation or have that hard decision, what's the actual outcome? And really, you can have really good outcomes from those hard situations of setting boundaries of workload, weight limits for the horses, what that horse is trained to do when they retire, where do they go when they retire, sometimes end of life decisions. And you can have really good outcomes and positive life experiences and lessons come from those. And that's across the board too. For everything that we've talked about, something that's kind of like been connecting in my brain is when we choose to put into play pathological altruism. So when we want to do something good, but the intention is not good and it's harmful, it's usually because we are avoiding the hard that goes with that situation, and we're avoiding that hard learning moment or life lesson that could come out of it. And we want to get to this good, positive outcome, but the path to get there is just maybe what we don't want, or maybe we haven't seen yet. But it's kind of interesting to just draw observations of what's similar and different between when we have these good intentions for our students, our horses, our volunteers, what we actually want to happen, and then the actions we take in between there and like why we're choosing to do those actions. Usually it's because we're avoiding hard conversations. We're avoiding possibly what could be confrontation. We're avoiding being perceived in a certain way. Tons of different stuff there. So I know I've rambled on a lot about pathological altruism, but I think that this is a really important subject for us to understand as instructors. And again, I not sure if this is a you're welcome or I'm sorry, now that you know what this term is and what it is in everyday life and in equine assisted services. But we've got to be aware of our good intentions, especially because we are so service-hearted usually as instructors. We are yes people, we are fixers, we are givers, and we tend to avoid some hard situations. And when we do that, we're usually not reaching the outcome we want. So it's important for us to really step back and look at what we want to happen and if the outcome is actually happening or not. And if it's not happening and it's not a good positive outcome, we need to be okay enough to say, that wasn't the right answer. I understand I might be emotional about this, but let's look at how we can actually get to the outcome I want. And maybe you reverse engineer it. I want to get here. What actions do I need to take to get to that? And this is the actual action and behavior I need to do, instead of trying to lead with the action we think is less scary, but then the outcome is not great. My brain thinks in reverse engineer a lot. So don't be afraid to challenge what you see out there in the equine industry. Watch out for all those things that are actual pathological altruism that are being pushed and promoted as best practices. Use your brain. Use your brain to observe situations where you are not emotionally invested into it, and ask people, what were you like? Why do you have this policy in place? Or why do you allow this to happen? Or why are your prices set this way? See if you can figure out what their intended good outcome was, the intentions were, and then look at actually what happened and see if you can piece out, well, here's how I would act differently to get this outcome. Because usually when we're not emotionally invested or involved in it, it's a whole lot easier for us to think logically and think more critically about it. So that's my encouragement to you guys. I really hope that this maybe sheds some light on how we can reduce burnout in our industry as well, as instructors, as programs as a whole, how we can create a better experience for everybody involved, our students, our volunteers, our horses especially, because pathological altruism is, like I said earlier on, it's rampant and it's out there, but that doesn't mean that just because it's out there and it's the norm in a lot of things, doesn't mean that it has to be the norm with you or at your program. Be the change, be the difference, go tell other instructors about this. Thank you for tuning in for this extremely long chat on pathological altruism. Drop your comments and thoughts in the chat below, whether you're watching or listening. I would love to hear from you. And if you like more formalized education versus just instructor chats like this, make sure you check out the Intuitive Instructor Club. That is an online educational learning platform that at the time of recording this has well over 200 videos in there that have been made specifically for adaptive horseback riding instructors and other professionals in the equine assisted services industry. We have over 350 members globally that are learning and growing together. And we have a couple different options of, kind of a do-it-yourself. You watch your videos, get your certificates, learn on your own. And then there's also another option for you guys that want more of the live classes and the community and the networking, because I host those meetings, and that's an option for you as well if you want a little bit more involvement and engagement and more challenge as an instructor. So make sure you check out the Intuitive Instructor Club, and other free resources I have are going to be listed on my website, hooffallsandfootfalls.com. I'll also link them down below. You can find my website, Facebook, and also the Intuitive Instructor Club linked down below. Thank you guys so much for joining in on this long chat. Looking forward to hearing from you guys in the comments and what you have learned about, or maybe had an aha moment about as it relates to pathological altruism. And let me know if there is another topic like this that you want me to discuss or dive into with the lens of an adaptive horseback riding instructor. and looking at it through that perspective. See you guys. Thank you.